To begin talking about race and ethnicity, I think it'd be helpful if you respond to each of these five statements. You can pause the video and do this in a notebook or just, write these responses down somewhere. But in response to each statement, I just want you to say whether you highly disagree with the statement, whether you're ambivalent, or whether you highly agree. Of course, if you're ambivalent, that's going to mean that you are somewhere in the middle. Maybe you can see both, two different perspectives on it, or, you understand a little bit of it, but you don't really agree with maybe another part of it. So just say whether you highly disagree, highly agree, or if you're kind of in between, which would be ambivalent. So you can pause the video and do that right now. Taking a look at these images here, if you look at the upper left, that's the title of a pretty influential book from the early 90s titled Race, The Power of an Illusion. And of course, an illusion is something that we see, or at least we think we see, but it might not be real. So they're saying, the implied message there is that race might not be real. Looking up at the upper right, what race do you identify yourself as? And this is an illustration that suggests that maybe race isn't all that important, or maybe race should not be as strong of an identifier as some people perhaps make it out to be. This illustration says that, well, we're all a part of the human race, not any particular um, more specific racial group. We're all, just humans. This image at the bottom left here, you see an individual through different prisms, and what race or ethnicity do they appear to be? Well, it's very ambiguous, right? We cannot tell based on this image, and I think that's the message behind the image. Race and ethnicity are often contingent upon or dependent upon who is viewing, right? Not necessarily what person is or what a person claims to be, but one's race or ethnicity is often contingent upon who is viewing the person, or who is doing the racial or ethnic labeling. So that's another, perspective on race and ethnicity. Then toward the bottom here, this is a picture of Rachel Dolezal, who famously, she was the leader of the Spokane, Washington chapter of the NAACP, and she famously identified as African American, even though several of her family members came out and said, she is not African American. Our family is white, but yet you see her quoted there saying, "I definitely am not white." So, you know, the message you might take away from this and this image is that race and ethnicity are subject to personal identification, different influences upon personal identification. People might choose to identify differently, perhaps a little differently than what others might identify them as. So in each of these images, we see race and ethnicity as being very negotiable, right? Very subject to whatever certain individuals identify as, or what they identify other people as. Yet, if we take the view that race is very fluid, it's very negotiable, perhaps it doesn't matter that much, we have to reconcile some of these racial and ethnic inequalities. Um, Looking at the graphic on the upper left, you see the racial wealth gap. Notice that whites um, have a median household wealth more than 20 times the median, black family. Notice whites, far above the other three racial and ethnic groups. Asians being in second place, but still, considerably trailing whites considerably, and then Hispanics and blacks at the lower ends of that distribution there. So there is racial inequality. At the upper right, we take a look at hate crimes on the basis of race. We see, now this is from 2008, so we're dealing with, perhaps antiquated or old data here, but in 2008, 72% of all hate crimes were committed against Black people, compared to just 18% for whites. Now, again, this is only on the basis of race. I personally would be interested in seeing hate crimes on the basis of religion, because we know that Muslims, Jews, in certain, not necessarily in America, but then in other parts of the world, Christians are um, persecuted or exacted violence against on the basis of their religion. So this graphic on the upper right is just hate crimes on the basis of race. I'd personally be interested in seeing that data as it applies to religions. But when we're talking about race, African Americans, or Black Americans, are overwhelmingly the most likely victim. Take a look at the chart on the bottom here. We see students suspended from school compared to student population by race, sex, and disability status. This is from earlier in the decade. Which students are suspended the most? Which group of students have the most overrepresentation? Once again, we see African Americans, 23.2% overrepresentation. That means that if African Americans are 12% of the population of all public school children, well, take that 12% and add 23.2 to it. So that'll be around 35% of all school suspensions. African American students are overrepresented in terms of school suspensions. White students, by contrast, are underrepresented by 17.8%. You also see that boys are overrepresented, as well as students with disabilities. Girls and students without disabilities are suspended from school at a lower percentage than their overall composition within the student body. So once again, we can say that, well, race is fluid, race is subjective, race is whatever somebody thinks it is or whatever somebody identifies as. And that's fine. People certainly do have those viewpoints. But you have to acknowledge these and other forms of prize-winning journalists for the New York Times. Title of the article is "Library Visit Then Held at Gunpoint. At Yale, the police detained my son." I'm just going to read a little excerpt from this. "This is the scenario I have always dreaded, my son at the wrong end of a gun barrel, face down on the concrete. I had always dreaded the moment that we would share stories about encounters with the police in which our lives hung in the balance. Intergenerational stories of joining the inglorious club. When that moment came, I was exceedingly happy I had talked to him about how to conduct himself if a situation like this ever occurred. Yet I was brewing with sadness and anger that he had to use that advice. I am reminded of what I have always known, but what some would choose to deny, that there is no way to work your way out, earn your way out of this sort of crisis. In these moments, what you've done matters less than how you look." So the backstory here, or the context of this, is you have Charles Blow, very very well regarded journalist for the New York Times. This is an individual who makes at least they're probably solid six-figure income, wealthy individual, and his son is at Yale University, one of the most selective and prestigious universities in America. Charles Blow is African American, as is his son. Even though Charles Blow is wealthy, even though his son has been admitted to and is attending a very prestigious university, um, Charles Blow is still saying that they're both a member of that inglorious club. What inglorious club? Well, they're both black men. And as such, they are subjected to heightened scrutiny, heightened profiling, and just heightened fear from the general public. And in this case, the police. He's saying that there's no way to work your way out or earn your way out. You can win a Pulitzer Prize, you can have a six-figure income, but if you are African American, there are going to be people who are afraid of you or who suspect you of wrongdoing. And if those individuals are police, that can have drastic, perhaps even fatal consequences, as we've seen in recent history with some um, prominent examples of police brutality with Minneapolis, Louisville, New York City, Sacramento, all throughout the country. So Charles Blow is saying here, is that, regardless of what you do, regardless of your achieved statuses, you can be a journalist, professor, um, doctor, doesn't really matter. The way you look can have drastic consequences, perhaps life-ending consequences for what happens in your life. So race and ethnicity in America do in fact matter, and we do have to reconcile these inequalities, even though it can often seem that, well, race is very subjective, or race is whatever people see it as, or however people identify. We have to take into account these types of racial inequalities and injustices in this case.